Hi everyone, my name is Lauren and I will be conducting my oral presentation on child abuse. So here's the agenda. So I'll start with a short introduction. Then I'm going to lead into a little bit of the history of some of the legislation and law that was put in place to protect children from child abuse. And then I'm going to lead us into a few services that are prominent at least in Pennsylvania, and some of which are prominent across the United States. And then we're going to lead into a few interventions. I'm going to talk about the micro, meso, and macro levels that we can hold interventions for individuals who have been victimized by child abuse. And then I have a short conclusion for us. So to begin, for my introduction, abuse is defined as an action that intentionally causes harm or injures another person. So when you put the word child in front of that, of course that categorizes it to a certain population. So child abuse is the physical maltreatment of a child, which also includes the sexual molestation. So abuse can be physical, which would be inflicting harm to the individual's body. It could be psychological or mental, which would be kind of like an emotional level of abuse. And then there's also the child abuse that we will be discussing today. The people that are at risk and the highest risk population would be minorities. So minorities include individuals that are not in the group of individuals that is the majority. So right now in our world, the majority would be Caucasian males. So child abuse affects minorities. So that would be, it could be Caucasian children still, but it is mostly affecting African American children, children of different cultural backgrounds. And this abuse can be inflicted by anybody and is often inflicted by people that we trust. So we're going to move on a little bit here. So the historical development of child abuse. So we're going to start with our first bubble. The first public case that I found in my research of child abuse dates back to 1874. Now that does not mean that child abuse was not in the world prior to that. It definitely was. It just was never brought to the attention of the public. So that first display of child abuse is dating back to 1874, which led fairly quickly. I think it should have led much quicker, but fairly quickly to the 1904 child labor reform. So this law put forth the efforts to eliminate child labor, which was also seen as child abuse. So back in the early 1900s, when children were working in factories and working on farms at very, very young ages and in very harsh conditions, this was seen as child abuse, child neglect, and what we call child labor. So leading from that, in 1909, the White House held a conference that took place on the care of dependent children. So this was designed to raise awareness on child neglect, which then led into 1912, which was the Children's Bureau, which became a law. And this law was to improve the lives of children and end that child labor, which was often abusive child labor practices, and to address the physical and mental well-being of a child. This led into the 1916 Child Labor Act, which was introduced but further deemed unconstitutional in 1918. So this was created to ban the sale of products that were being sold by industries and factories and farms that used children in child labor. That then leads us into the 1935 Social Security Act. So in the Social Security Act, there is a section that discusses the child welfare services of children. So if we look at that in 1935, this included the strengthening of child welfare services and the creation of child welfare services for individuals in rural or lower income areas. In 1962, the Social Security Act also required that each state make child welfare services available to all children. And this also funded further research to help support child welfare. In 1974, Congress enacted the first major legislation addressing child abuse, which was called the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. This law required that every state across the United States create and have a system that they use to have people in the community report child abuse. So in our case, right now, we use what's called a child line. And this is a phone number or a website that we use to document and report any suspected child abuse, whether it be, it might end up not being child abuse, but, as individuals and as social workers, we have to make sure that we are documenting this and reporting it. So in 1974, the law required that everybody have one of those systems to report child abuse, and this law also required that the state has to respond to those allegations and further investigate the allegations. In 1980, the Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act was passed, and this was passed to help reduce the placement for children who are in foster care. Shortly after that, in 1988, the Child Abuse Prevention and Adoption and Family Services Act was passed. So we enhanced that to include the child abuse prevention. In 1996, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act amendments were passed, so they made some edits to that and passed that as well. And then in 1998, the Protection of Children from Sexual Predators Act was passed. So this specifically is geared toward child abuse that is sexual abuse. So that would be, the violation and exploitation of a child in a sexual matter. In 2001, the Promoting Safe and Stable Families Amendment was passed. So this was used and had funding for programs for families to help support their marriages, to have successful marriages, which was defined to be a part of a safe and stable family. And then they also provided mentors for children who have parents that are incarcerated. In 2003, the PROTECT Act was passed. So PROTECT stands for prosecutorial, I can't say that, remedies and other tools to end exploitation of children today. So that's what that act stands for. And so this was used to prevent child abuse and investigate and prosecute the violent crimes that are geared toward and enacted toward children. So then in 2008, the Keeping Children and Families Safe Act was passed. So now I'm going to talk about a few of the services that I found that I feel are can be used for anybody in our program right now with Widener. Since we're an online program, I tried to find some services that were not geared toward a specific area of the United States. So the first one is the Childline phone number, which is provided by the Department of Human Services. So I included here the phone number, which is 1-800-932-0313. Then I also included the website for them. So what you do on the Department of Human Services site to report a child line would be to include all of the known information about the child and the individual who is the abuser into a report, and then it is then sent out to the Children, Youth, and Families or Child Welfare Service of your county, and they then go out to that home and they investigate the allegation. So that's the first service that I included. The second service here that I have is the Prevent Child Abuse in America. So this is the kind of the same thing, but it takes a national approach to stopping the child abuse and neglect. So I put the website for that as well, and they also do different things to raise awareness and educate individuals on child abuse and neglect. And then the last thing that I included is the Children, Youth, and Families of our each of our counties. So it's the Child Welfare Service in each county. So that would be like CYS or CYF. A lot of different counties and areas have different names and titles and acronyms they use for their specific program. And these individuals provide support to the families and the child, and they advocate for that child. They give you different programs, different services that are available for the children and the family to help support them through that difficult time in their life. So now we're going to talk about some of the interventions. So micro would be the individual level of interventions. So in the micro level, we're assessing the needs of our client. Some of the interventions that we use is CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. The way that we use this is through different activities that include journaling, talk therapy. For children, it's very important to use play therapy, especially when they're unable to communicate their needs and concerns. And then we also advocate towards self-care for our children, and we use trauma therapy as well. Moving on into the meso level, so this would be like a family, agency, and community level of intervention. So here we're trying to assess the needs of the client in connection to their peers, which would be their family, and this is on like a community level. So activities that we could use in our therapy with our client would be I statements. That way they can discuss how they feel, like I feel XYZ, in discussion with like family members. This we can also use like on a community level. So this could be raising awareness in your specific community and providing those different services to your members of the community. Moving on into the macro level, which would be the state and national level of intervention. So for this, it would be best to educate and advocate against child abuse. So, educating them further on the different forms of child abuse and get down into like the nitty-gritty of what is defined as child abuse, and then advocate against those actions and advocate for our children. The child does not necessarily have a strong voice to stand up for themselves and discuss what has occurred to them, so it is our jobs to do that for them. And then another way that we can do this is to research different services and interventions that best support our child and address their needs. Then we have the legislation portion. So this would be that state or national level, creating legislation for your area. So this can be done through signing different petitions, creating support groups that can help you advocate and hold different programs for